Well, good morning, church family. Once again, you got me. Yeah, Rick and Tracy are visiting family in Arkansas, Oklahoma, both. I'm not sure. Um, and so he asked me if I would preach again. I was like, 2 times in 1 month. Wow. Phew. That's normally like 2 or 3 times a year, but so this special occasion here, I hope. Um, so, Kaylee, thank you for singing that. And certainly, this is a time of the year that we are contemplating the past, looking back, reflecting. I mean, it's usually when we have time with family and the holidays, we actually are able to pause and think about, where we've been, what's going on. It's usually when we have family around. It's happened a couple times this season where I've been able to talk with family and friends, and inevitably you start reminiscing, you start telling stories about, do you remember when we did this and when we got in trouble and, how we got out and how we didn't get caught and things like that. When it's fun sitting around with family and friends, and it gets us to reminiscing. And reminiscing in itself is not bad at all. But ultimately, sometimes I think this time of the year we're also looking at resolutions. And I thought about reading some funny resolutions, but I thought, you can find those. I'm sure you've already been looking around already about resolutions. I'm one who I don't do resolutions because I found that I break them pretty soon anyways. So I'm not really a resolution person, but I am certainly a person that reflects and I evaluate. Just over the years, that's kind of how I am. This is not just the end of 2019. We're just a few days away from 2020. It's really an end of a decade. And this morning I was mentioning to the youth, and my son said something I hadn't thought of. He's like, "Oh, welcome to the roaring 20s." I'm like, it might be. I mean, I've heard about it. I wasn't born during that time, but this just might be the next roaring 20s. I don't know. Certainly there's voices out there that are loud, that are, we have to hear sometimes and can't turn off. There's a lot of roaring going on. But anyhow, so reminiscing. And, eventually, if you're sitting around talking to people and family, you'll get to this saying, and I titled this sermon, The Good Old Days. And that came up a couple times, oh, those were the good old days. I remember when those, and sometimes we think that term is, or that phrase is something that we attribute to someone who's older, maybe with gray hair or no hair. Well, that's not true because, contrary to popular belief, I hear the students say things, and they say this, I've heard some of the high school students say, oh, back when I was in junior high, I didn't have a care in the world. It was easy. I'm like, okay. Those are the good old days. And I hear junior high kids say, well, when we were in elementary school, all we did was run around the playground. We didn't learn nothing. I'm like, well, you're here. You had to learn something. But, I mean, it's everybody. Everybody starts reminiscing about the good old days. It doesn't matter what age you are. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about when we titled this. Has you ever heard of the good old days syndrome? Anybody know what the good old days syndrome is? Well, let me tell you. Basically, it's where people cherry pick ideas and thoughts and memories. They turn on the selective, memory and remember all the good things, and they forget about all the other stuff. They just put that filter on, and we don't remember all the other things that were going on that surrounded our lives at the time. It's, we'd like to remember the good things, but there's a lot of lessons that happen in life that we can't forget. And so that's kind of where I wanted to go this morning. We're going to be in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So if you've got a Bible or you've got your phone, we're going to be back and forth. We're going to spend most of our time in Exodus and Numbers and in Matthew and Mark with a couple side trips. So let me just get you to go right now where we're going to go. Put your fingers at Exodus 15, second book of the Bible. Exodus 15:23. Just hold it. So again, nobody really wants to relive bad ideas and bad memories. My father was born, he was what I think they called a product of the Great Depression. And I remember he would get really frustrated. He would say, people say, oh, anytime people talked about the Great Depression as the good old days, he'd go, would somebody please explain to me what was so good about it? because he was like, I lived it. I was growing up and I was a product of it. And he's like, they don't know. It's usually people looking back that maybe don't remember about the hardships. But some people, they lived it, they do. And he's like, these are the good days. These are the good days compared to when I was growing up. He's like, for Christmas, we got dirt and a stick one time. I'm like, really? Really? So, you've heard those stories too. I had to walk to school uphill in snow both directions. Yeah. People are fond of saying things like that. But sometimes people talk about the good old days out of a sense of nostalgia, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with it. But living in the past can reveal a problem with our relationship with God. When we focus more on where we were rather than looking forward to where God wants us to be. So that's actually point number one. I was going to jump right into that and read that again for you. So living in the past can reveal a problem in our relationship with God when we focus more on where we were than what God wants us to go, or looking forward to where God wants us to be. All right? And that's kind of what happened to the Israelites when Moses led them out of Israel. So if you're, I told you to hold on to chapter 15, 23 to 27. I'm actually going to go to 15, verse 1 through 19. We're not going to read it because it's long. But in your spare time, like today, if you get bored somewhere during the sermon, you can read. As long as you're reading the Bible, I don't mind, just you get a little zoned out. But there's a song that we read about. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit about it. But there's some good theology there, of course. And there's a lot of hymns. If you'll read through those 19 verses, you'll see some things that we sing in hymns. And basically what it was in Exodus chapter 15 through 1 through 19, it's a record of a song that the Israelites sang praising the Lord for delivering them from the pursuing Egyptian army there at the Red Sea. We know this story. It's true. We know what happened. Moses opened the Red Sea. They went through, and they closed it on the Egyptians. Okay? That's basically those 19 verses. It's a song, and it goes into detail about what happened. But here's what happened. Only 3 days later, 3 days, just 3 days after singing this song and walking and composing this, the Israelites were unable to find water in the desert of Shur. And guess what they did? Here's where you look in Exodus 15, 23. Let me see if I can read. Nope, not going to be able to read this without glasses. All right. Unless we have it up there. Yes. Excellent. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Marah. For anybody that's named Marah, I apologize. Apparently, it means bitter. I'm just reading from the Bible. And the people, this is what they did. They grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Okay? And then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. And there the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, "If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments and all of his statutes, I will put none of the disease on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer." And then, make a note right here, and then they came to Elim. They left this place where there were 12 springs and 80 palm trees, and they camped by the water. All right? So it's kind of interesting. In verse 24, we see what they did. 3 days after they had seen this miracle and they'd been saved by the waters being parted at the Red Sea, 3 days later, they're already grumbling. Okay? I don't know. They don't have trust. I don't know what it is. But they had just seen one of the greatest miracles ever recorded in our Bible, and they had little trust in God, little trust in Moses, and they just simply were worried that he couldn't provide the water. Well, please note that last verse in 27. After the lesson was learned, after there was a testing, the Lord told them what he wanted them to do. And then he led them to a much better place. He didn't keep them there by the sweet water. I don't know, maybe the log was only temporary, but he didn't keep them there. He tested them, and he took them to a better place. Keep this in mind through all this morning. Keep that in mind through this year. God takes you someplace, teaches you something, but he takes you to a better place if you can learn the lesson. It says they came to Elim, and there were 12 springs and 80 palm trees, and they camped there. They didn't have to stay at this little pond that was somewhat bitter that he made sweet. Let's look at Exodus 16. It's just a verse or two down, and verse 1 through 3. I think I have this one. Do we have it up there? Verse 16, verse 1 through 3. They set out from Elim after they'd camped there for a while, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin. Not necessarily a good place, but that's what it is. Now this was between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel did what? They grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord, by the hand of the Israelites, and would that we had sat by pots, we were sitting by in Egypt pots of meats and bread to the full. You have brought us into this wicked world, this wicked land, to kill the whole assembly with hunger. You would think they had learned their lesson back when they went from this bitter water to the 12 springs, but no, lesson was not learned. They're grumbling again. They started talking about the good old days. Oh, we were in Egypt, we sat around pots of meat, and we ate till we were full. We had plenty of bread. Cherry-picking ideas, cherry-picking memories. They don't remember what they were having to do to work and how they were having stipulations put on them and doubling their work, giving them less to do. Cherry-picking ideas, reminiscing. So that's kind of the good old days. There's a perfect example of a good old days syndrome. They're grumbling and complaining, and their longing for a return to good old days back in Egypt led to really another problem for the Israelites. It led them to become indifferent towards the miracles of God. That can happen, where we start being indifferent to what God is doing, because we start living in that past. That's why it reveals, living in the past reveals some problems with us. Lest you think that these are issues just with the Old Testament and people in the Old Testament, let's look in the New Testament. Look in Mark, go to Matthew, Mark, first two chapters of the New Testament. In the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, there are parallel accounts of a time when Jesus went back to his hometown of Nazareth. If you look in Mark, I believe chapter 6, yeah, we have it up there. Mark chapter 6, it says, and he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went on about the village teaching. At the end of the parallel of Matthew 13, we're simply told Jesus could do not many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Although he had performed many miracles in the public, even though he had been teaching, he was famous, and people were marveling at how he preached. Very few in his own hometown believed in him. Instead, they grumbled, and they grumbled. They said, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this the kid who grew up down the street? You know, we know this guy. Where's he getting all this? You know, even in Matthew 13:57, they took offense at him. It says that. They took offense at Jesus. And in fact, they sneered at him. Sneered. In between the times in Exodus, when the Israelites were leaving, and Numbers, there were only about 2 years. Only 2 years had passed, yet little had changed. Surely, you would think the Israelites still remember the miracle of the Red Sea and how Moses took the log and threw it in the water and made it from bitter to sweet, how he protected them. No. You know, also, we take for granted, I guess they take for granted that Moses and God were taking care of them. In the daytime, they had the presence of God with them by smoke, and at night, he had fire. He provided manna, water every time they got thirsty. How many times? We read in the Old Testament, it's like 3 different times that Moses had to do something to provide water. You would think having the presence of God with them in the daytime in their camp and at night, I've often wondered, how do you become indifferent to that? These visuals that God was there with them. Apparently, they just weren't impressed. That's what I'm reading. Apparently, they're not impressed with God's power. They're never satisfied. Not in the least. Everything God had done up to that point really made no lasting impression on them. I believe it's for that same reason that we're told in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark that Jesus could do no miracles in his hometown. It's not that Jesus didn't have any power. He had power. He's the Son of God. I believe Jesus could do very few miracles because everything that he had done or set up into that time, it didn't impress them. They didn't know him that well. They weren't impressed by him or his message or his miracles. They didn't believe his message, just as the Israelites didn't believe in God's power. And the people of Canaan. You remember the story when Moses sent the 12 spies into the land, and they came back, and 10 of them said, no, there's no way, it's a land of giants. It is a land of milk and honey, but we can't take it. But 2 guys, Joshua and Caleb, said, no, wait a minute, we can do this, we can do this. All right, that's in Numbers. It's just been 2 years. 2 years, I'm timelining this for you, since we had them leaving and having the Red Sea parted. 2 years. And they're without faith. And basically what they want to do is they want to give up. Here's the deal. Point number 2. If you don't believe the message, you won't be impressed by the messenger or his miracles. I'll read that again. If you don't believe the message, you won't be impressed by the messenger or his miracles. Let's take that look at Numbers. It's just a little bit further from Exodus. Numbers 14, verse 1 through 4. All right. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt. Cherry-picking ideas again. Or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose another leader and go back to Egypt. Grumbling, reminiscing, saying, the good old days. Joshua and Caleb were the 2 of the 12 who sent to the promised land, and only 2 to give a good report. When they tried to convince the people to trust God and his promises of deliverance, the Israelites wanted to stone them to death. And that's in verse 10. You can read ahead there. That's when God intervened and prevented them from doing so. This account reminds me again of 2 other accounts that happened to Jesus in the New Testament, in John 5:18 and John 31. The people tried to stone Jesus. It wasn't enough that we hear that he was kind of sneered upon and that he was resented and there was grumbling against him. There were those that wanted to stone him at least twice. Jesus, but he was able to always slip away. Joshua, Caleb, Moses, Aaron, Jesus. There's a theme going here. They were all protected by the power of God, but they were all grumbled against, and at different times people wanted to stone them because of the message. Okay? John tells us that Jesus was able to slip away because it wasn't his time. His time had not yet arrived. Jesus had just finished telling the crowd in John 10:18, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. He's talking about his life. This command I received from my Father. That's John 10:18. According to God's plan for the redemption of mankind, the manner and time of Jesus' death was already predetermined, and it had nothing to do with humans at that point. By God only knew that he was what his end would be and where. That's why he's able to slip away, because it was not yet his time. That's what we hear about him from John. Jesus was protected by the power of God. Aaron, Moses, Caleb, all the times that they wanted to be stoned, they were protected by the authority of God. In both instances, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they wanted to stone the messenger because they didn't like the message. The people in Moses' time longed for good old days back in Egypt. The people in Jesus' time basically clung to their century-old man-made traditions and religion and rituals that had little to do with glorifying God and praising his name. So point 3, instead of looking ahead to the promises, they looked back to the past. Looking ahead, instead of looking ahead to the promise, they looked back to the past. The people in Moses' time, they looked back to their past lives. The people in Jesus' time, they looked back to put their trust in traditions, past traditions and rituals. But in our Christian walk, we don't do that. We can't long for our old ways of living because we know that where we once were, we were on a path that led to death. In John chapter 5, the very words of Jesus tell us, "Verily, truly, I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged by the cross, and that has crossed over from death to life." That's John 5:24. We can't look back to the old days. They're gone. They're not coming back. No matter how hard you try, no matter how long you sit and think and lock yourself up in mental downtime, you can't go back to those times. There's no do-overs. None of us invented a time machine. We can't go back. Basically, I have the feeling that they're not always as good as we remember anyways. Instead, we're supposed to be looking forward. We're supposed to be moving on, towards what the Lord has and the work he has for us to do here and now, and his kingdom that's coming and building his kingdom here. Regardless of how we feel about it, Christ is using us. That's what he's doing now. Since Christ has left and been resurrected, how he gets the gospel out, how his message gets out is us. This is his plan and how he's chosen it. So in the coming days, as you're thinking about New Year's resolutions, whether you pick one or you don't, be thinking about how God is going to use you in the days to come, because he will. He wants to. There's many opportunities every day, and God chooses to use us. You are his plan. Our good days are not behind us. This is our point number 4. Our good old days are not behind us. They are in front of us. And we can say that with certainty because as followers of Jesus Christ, we know the best is yet to come. It really is. This morning I got up and I have to admit that I started reminiscing a little bit. I went upstairs because I was like, I remembered I had this couple of jackets that I thought, this will look good. I went upstairs, went to the guest room. It's probably always a bad sign when you realize that you got clothes in the guest room. They're there for a reason. So I went up there and I was like trying to put the jacket on. I was like, this. And I put it on and looked in the mirror like, that's a little tight. Maybe that's why. I pulled another one out, put it on, like, oh my gosh. It wasn't so much here. It's like, how old are these things, And I found a little tag in one. It was like, 2003. I'm like, wow. I started reminiscing, thinking, man, I wish I could still wear these things. They look good. I would look good in this. And, but I thought, okay, here I am already going back, thinking what I could have been, or what do I need to do? And I started, well, maybe if I lost weight. Oh, no, okay. Don't do resolutions. It's always a life change. Went back downstairs, put on Old Blue, because it fits good. Fits good. Yeah, it's light. But we do that. Tell me this. We do it every day. We reminisce and we think about things. But I want to challenge you to, in the coming years, this year and this, as you think about this, 2020, it can be a great year, a great decade. And God is alive and well. He's in control. Absolutely in control. But our lives, the things how they used to be, I don't know what poet said it, but he said, you can never step in the same river twice. You step in that water and it's moving. You take another step and it's moving. That is us. That is this church. We are moving. We're not going back. We're going forward. We need to be doing that in our lives and our households. Again, it's okay to reminisce. Don't camp out there. Be honest. Remember the bad things and the good things too. Because we don't want to be like the Israelites and forget those lessons and 3 or 4 days later or a month later have to do it again. God doesn't, He will repeat the lesson to you, usually in a harder fashion. I preached a little bit about that on the first Sunday of the month, how Peter had to learn some of the lessons twice. So do we. But it would behoove us to learn the lessons the first time. I can tell you that every time Christ says, will you do this? And I said yes, there have been like a domino effect in my life. God's going to offer you opportunities this coming year. I want to pray and beg you to say yes to Him, whatever they are. Say yes to God. Say yes to Christ. Things will happen. It's a domino effect. It may take 6 months, but you'll do something for Christ, and then 6 months later, 4 months later, someone will say, hey, I heard da-da-da, and you're like, I remember doing that like 6 months ago. That's the way God works. He wants you to say yes because we are His vessels. Again, He's using us. And in this coming year, I plead you to say yes to God and just follow through and watch what happens. We don't need to repeat lessons. Most of us don't want to repeat lessons. I want to show a short video clip. So as you think about this week, and inevitably you're reminiscing and you're spending time and reflecting, and it's good. Reminiscing is good. Don't live there. Don't stay there. Learn the lessons. But if you do set resolutions, I would just caution you to look back at the ones you have set and figure out, did you do them? Did you keep them? Most of us don't. Some of us do. Some of them are easy, some are hard. But know this, God keeps His promises. God always keeps His promises. Always. And He's here to love you. He's here to take care of us. He is here to take us through tough times and good times. He is our Heavenly Father. And if you don't know Him, don't go into 2020 not. This time, this morning, this week, what's left of it, start a whole new decade of your life knowing who God is and knowing that He loves you. He is love. It's not a cliche. It's all this Bible says from beginning to end is all about His redemptive love. This is the owner's manual we have. And I just pray for you. If we'll have the accompanists come up this morning. If you would like to come down and receive Christ or just pray with me, I would love to do that. Let's stand and pray.